Hello, I'm Jeff Davis. Sorry for the delay in getting this podcast to you. And this time I'm presenting something I've never done before. With nearly 7 years of being on the wine road, I haven't had a father and son team on the same show or podcast to celebrate Father's Day. And ladies, don't feel left out. I was planning on pursuing a Mother's Day interview. However, COVID-19 kicked that plan to the curb. So, if you will, enjoy this interview from Father's Day weekend, featuring Fred and Andy Schweiger.
It's fun to have Andy kind of just being able to follow through and take over and just do a great job with what we're doing.
Keeps you young too, huh?
Yeah, no doubt. I get up in the morning, I'm looking for, let's go,
Fred and Andy have been growing grapes on Spring Mountain above Napa Valley since the early 80s and began crafting their own wine 10 years later. They've really dialed it in, and as a result, they have an active, loyal wine club who get to share their ideas with the Schweigers. It'll come as no surprise that these two are full of stories, much like the small-town tales you'd hear on someone's porch in rural America, with grapes and wine as the product instead of corn, cattle, or wheat. The Schweiger property features vineyards in every direction. There's a bowl shape to the left with rolling hills on the sides, and a steady slope to the right that ends at the surrounding redwood trees. We met at the table in their tasting room and kept the appropriate distance between us, which you'll be able to hear by some of the reverb on the microphones. Fred and Andy shared one. I had my own mic. And here's how we started. Well, first of all, happy Father's Day, fellas.
Thank you.
Fred, I know you're a father. Andy?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And grandfather.
Not me, him.
Yeah. And we have a dog joining us today. What's his name?
Ginny.
Ginny?
Yes.
So it's a she?
Yes.
Okay. They might hear some panting in the background. That's not Andy panting, so in case you're wondering.
I'm waiting my turn to get to taste the wine. That's why I'm panting.
Yeah. Well, and you've been kind enough to pour us some 2019 Sauvignon Blanc, which is a delicious wine, and I'm not surprised with this property.
Well, actually, this fruit comes from Sonoma County.
Oh, okay. Well,
It's too warm up here to grow Sauvignon Blanc, and a very good friend of ours, Bob Ubaldi, grows it. His dad has been growing the grapes there in Kenwood since 1920.
that's right, because it gets pretty warm up here. You're at the top of the Mayacamas Mountains, but you're above the fog line, so you don't get the cooling nighttime temperatures as much, do you?
Well, we're at 2,000-foot elevation. The fog typically hangs in about 1,500 feet. And what happens as that fog comes in the valley, it raises the heat up. So when the sun goes down and it's, say, 75 degrees, it'll warm up to about 80 degrees. So the nights stay warm but not hot. And the days don't get hot because we'll get a cool influence off the ocean,
Right.
being at this elevation. Whereas the valley will get up, when they're 100 degrees, we're never more than 90. So it's a great, nice, balance of warm to cool.
Tell me how you found this property back in 1961.
How I found this property, I worked for CAL FIRE out at Ridgeway headquarters, and I was a new kid on the block, and they wanted me to deliver a fire truck from Santa Rosa to St. Helena. Well, I didn't want to ask for directions, and I was new up because in San Francisco. So I looked at a map, and I said, wow, this road here goes right up over the mountain into St. Helena. So I'm coming over the top. The last 2 miles of St. Helena Road was still one-way dirt road.
Yeah, I bet.
And so I'm coming over the top over here, and here's this for sale sign on this beautiful piece of property. So I called my dad up and said, hey, we got to look at this. And so it kind of grew from there.
And it was totally forested at that time.
Totally.
Wow.
Yeah, there was nothing on this property. No homes, no wells,
Yeah.
not even a road.
Now, did you have winemaking in mind at that time, or wine growing at that time, or what?
Well, no, if I don't know how much time we have here, but when my grandparents came here from Austria, then about 5 years later they brought over their parents. Their parents did not like living in San Francisco, so they went and said, "Hey, well, we'll buy some property in the Santa Cruz Mountains." So they bought property in the Santa Cruz Mountains, steep hillside, just pretty awful terrain, really. And they planted a vineyard. And then my grandfather made wine. The property was beautiful. I thought, well, maybe someday we'll do something.
I noticed on their website there's a long gap between when they bought that mountain property in 1961 to 1979 when they cleared the land for vineyards.
You know, we need three things in life to make things happen, basically: time, ambition, and money. Well, I never had any time. I'm raising a young family. Always had the ambition, never had any money. Well, I'm a general building contractor, so in 1979, interest rates were 21%. I had two jobs in front of me. The bank pulled the loan, canceled the contract on both properties. And now I had, four really good carpenters, and it took a while for me to find four really good carpenters that loved what they did and could work together without an ego and do coffered ceilings in a house that looked like it was built 100 years ago. So I said, listen, guys, rather than go on unemployment, you want to help me cut down trees, and I'll pay you better than unemployment. And that's kind of where it started.
Okay.
I went home that night and convinced my wife why it was a good idea to have a vineyard. She says, what are you going to do with a vineyard? I said, well, it'll be a hobby.
Now, did you clear the land at all for the purpose of maybe building a cabin up here prior to that?
Well, my mom and dad's house was up here on the top of that mountain up there to your left.
Okay, so they did build up here after you found it.
We did build them a home up there, and mom and dad retired there.
Okay.
Which was nice.
Yeah.
So we started clearing in 1979. It took us a year and a half. And very, very slow process. My dad loved every minute of it. Good. He thought it was pretty cool. So we're out there chainsawing stuff down, and then bulldozing out the roots and pushing together all the stumps, and it was quite a challenge.
Now 79. So Andy, were you a part of that process?
9 years old, so learned how to drive tractors at a very young age, and
so you were helping out.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh boy, these son and daughter are really good. Put up drip hose. Yeah, and, we couldn't afford all the labor, but we had enough money to be able to get the plants planted and build the trellis system. So it worked out really good.
Great. So then the first harvest was 1984.
1984. Chardonnay that went to Smith Madrone.
Oh, okay.
Because
that didn't have to travel very far, did it?
No, it was nice. We took it, gondola by gondola behind a pickup truck.
Yeah.
Because once you start, the first 10, 12 years of our vineyard life, we sold all of our fruit.
Right.
Mostly to Valley Floor people. They loved our fruit, and that's sort of what built up, hey, when do you think we might want to start our own winery? Well, all these wineries would invite us back in the wintertime to taste the wine that they made from our fruit. Mm-hmm. And they were pretty impressed when they said, can we buy another 5 tons?
Yeah. And like a lot of growers, you get to the point where you're like, hey, they're making some good money with our grapes. We should get in on this.
Well, then along came the 1991 harvest. We had a relatively new planted block, our gate block, which is some of our most sought-after Cabernet. And in that era, it was only going to be, 2 ton?
4 ton.
Okay.
4 ton. And I called all the wineries we were selling to. Oh, that's, and I understand it today, but I didn't then. Doggone it, 4 tons, all it'll do is mess up our 8 or 10 ton fermenter. We're not really wanting to tie up one whole fermenter just for that.
Huh.
So I said, well, heck with you guys. I'm going to go rent some equipment.
So that was the turning point right there?
Well, we made our own wine that year, 1991. Andy, you were...
I was still in school.
Andy was still in school, UC Davis. So it's kind of a career project, or beginning career project for him to keep an eye on.
Uh-huh. When did you start school at UC Davis, Andy?
I started in the fall of '88 and took a year off for an internship, so graduated in '93.
And did you travel during that internship?
No, actually, it was an internship right here in the Napa Valley at Schweiger Vineyards.
Oh, okay. Great. I was going to ask, who were your early clients?
Newton, Stag's Leap, Joe Cafaro, and it's Fife. I'm forgetting one. Oh, ZD, that was huge.
Oh,
ZD loved our Chardonnay.
Oh.
As a matter of fact, we continued to sell pretty much exclusively Chardonnay to that family. And it was so nice, too, because there was another family winery.
I asked Andy if he was the winemaker from the very beginning, and he said yes. And then Fred added his wife Sally, Andy's mother, was the assistant winemaker while Andy was working at Chateau St. Jean, and a year later when he was at Cane Cellars, just down the mountain road a bit. So he would instruct his mom on what to do the next day, and that went on for 2 years until Andy was ready to work full-time at Schweiger Vineyards. Props to Sally for doing her part.
So when we did, we fermented in our 2-ton valley bins, and then we drove the valley bins after it was fermented down to Cane, put it through their press, and took it back up here.
Nice. Yeah.
It's splashing, sloshing around.
And nice to have the relationship with Kane to for them to allow you to use their equipment.
Oh yes, yeah. That's actually that was one of my first jobs. I did clean their inside of their press one time.
It's give and take.
Well, yeah, and I admire Andy does it over the years now that you get wet.
Yeah. Andy, describe the relationship between your winemaking and the unique rolling mountainside terrain you have here at Schweiger.
Well, I have the unique privilege as the winemaker here that I was involved with the vineyard being established, and that I'm not some winemaker walking into somebody else's ranch going, why are the rows configured this way? Why is your spacing this way? I know because I've lived it, and because the farming is so much in my blood, even though, yes, I specifically went off to college to get trained as a winemaker. I still minored in viticulture, but I'm still a grape grower first, because you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and you can't make great wine out of inferior grapes. And so it all starts out in the vineyard, and so I figure my top job is, okay, we worked our butts off out in the vineyard to create this great fruit. The worst thing I can do in the winery is get in the way of that quality by trying to put some personal winemaker mark on it. So if anything, I'd say my style of winemaking is be as non-invasive as possible, do what I can to help express the natural flavors of the fruit, but never force it to be something that it's not. We're starting a new project up here right now. We have 2 acres that, while most of our property, earlier my dad said most of our property is too hot for Sauvignon Blanc, we actually have 2 acres that we've grown Chardonnay in for a number of decades. And the Chardonnay that was coming off there was very high acid because it's so cool. And so we actually are somewhat contrarian right now as climate change is occurring and daytime highs are getting hotter. This block is still very cool during the day. So we're trying a Pinot Noir project there.
Oh, wow.
And right off the bat, when I started sketching this idea out and presenting it to my mom and dad, they were, what style of Pinot Noir are you going to make? And I said, I'm not being cavalier. I don't know. I don't know until we receive the fruit and we taste the fruit and we make a vintage with it and we make another vintage with it and we find our way, because other than Schoolhouse, not a lot of Pinot Noir going up on this mountain.
No, I heard that Schoolhouse was now the only ones who were still doing Pinot Noir.
Yes.
At this point in the interview, we took a break so Andy could pour us some of his Chardonnay. It has a nice amount of acidity, a soft mouthfeel, and only a hint of oak. That's because they only use about 20% new oak during the initial aging process.
Yeah, about 20% new oak. About 40% of it we ferment in stainless. But then eventually that goes down to barrel as well for aging. That way we can take advantage of, as the yeast autolysize, break up, not only does it release amino acids into the wine that make the wine increase viscosity and make the mouthfeel more round, every time we stir, we're actually gently clarifying the wine so that when it comes time to bottle, it's already sparkling clear.
Yeah, very nice. And now you just poured the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon, which is your new release.
Yeah, we do things a bit differently here. There's a reason it's called food and wine pairing, not wine and food pairing. And overall, our job is to bring a bottle of wine to the table that is going to complement the meal, not beat it into submission. I sometimes look at, a fine night out dining is...
Not without a dog.
Not without a dog, but it's like a three-legged bar stool, and you need to have great service, you need to have great food, and you need to have great wine. You go out and you have a great meal, great wine, terrible service, it's going to ruin the whole evening. Somebody brings out a $500 Colt Cabernet, everybody's going to ooh and ah over the wine and completely ignore the food and ignore the hospitality. Everything needs to be in balance. And there is no such thing as a $500 bottle of wine. I'm sorry.
I'm in agreement with you there.
Yeah.
So you put a lot of thought into what you're doing down there in the cellar and the barrel room.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that Our first few vintages, we were only barrel aging 21, 22 months, kind of Napa Valley average. And I always felt like, we haven't really given these tannins enough time to resolve. And just because that's what everybody else does, and, the wine writers say, okay, now it's time for you to release this wine. Well, wait a minute. You're not the boss of me. I know what's best with my fruit.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Right.
And the 98 vintage provided us with an interesting opportunity. When life hands you lemons, you find a friend with vodka and throw one heck of a party. No. But, you have to look at challenges as opportunities. And when the wine writers essentially said, avoid anything from Northern California in 1998, it was a tough time to sell wine. And normally our vintages would sell out in 10 to 12 months. Well, we're going on our third year of trying to sell 98. I'm getting ready to bottle the 2001 Cabernet, and the lady who we rent warehouse space from says, well, when are you planning on releasing your 99 and your 2000? I'm running out of space here. And that's when I took Dad aside and said, hey, look, let's just bottle the Chardonnay this year. Bottle what needs to be bottled. Let's leave everything else to hang out for another year. I believe it's only going to get better. Give those tannins more time in that naturally aerated environment to soften, to polymerize, to become more food friendly, to become more complex and more layered. And so we did the big experiment that year and left everything in barrel, and it's paid us back in spades. It's
good lesson, huh?
I think we're making some of the best structured and layered, intricate wines from here. Anybody can make a big sledgehammer fruit bomb. We're trying to do something a little more elegant and nuanced.
Was 98 the rainy year? Is that the problem, or what was the issue?
No, there wasn't much. There was not much. It was very cloudy, foggy. We didn't have enough what we call sun heat degree days to mature the fruit. The valley picked typically in then October, early November. We didn't pick at all. And finally, there's not a green leaf on the leaves out there. And Andy's saying, Dad, what are we going to do? I said, unless we get it to where it's in balance, we're not picking that stuff. We wound up, Indian summer kicked in, warmed up the last week in November.
Well, lucky
and
you.
We picked in the first week in December. Wow. We've got great balance of sugar and acid. The pH was just right where we want it. I told my amigos, I said, listen, don't go home, because that's when everybody really went home back to Mexico. So tell you what, I'll learn your Christmas carols in Spanish. Please stay. They did. I bought them round-trip airline tickets so they wouldn't leave ahead. They stayed, we harvested, and it turned out beautiful fruit in 98.
You learned all the lyrics to Feliz Navidad.
Yeah, we did.
Andy, why don't you tell me about your proprietary blend, the Dedication?
Sure. Well, that's kind of a fun, kind of father-son working together, because when we started making wine here, Dad made it very clear that, hey, look, I don't know winemaking, I just know I grow great grapes. So none of that Mickey Mouse blending you do at Cane or Chateau Saint Jean or Joseph Phelps. Just 100% Cabernet, 100% Merlot.
I'm sure those properties would love to hear the Mickey Mouse comment, too.
Well, I'm always up for learning something.
Well,
show me.
And it was over time, by the time we got to the 2000 vintage, I started showing Dad that, hey, just 1% Merlot in our Cabernet. It is still true to type. It's still true to varietal. But we've added just a slight hint of blue fruit, and there's just a subtle boysenberry or blueberry or pomegranate, and it's not dominating. It's just helping create another layer of intricacy to this wine. And so by the time we got to 2003, I had convinced Dad to take some of that original 4 acres of Chardonnay that had been replanted over to 4 acres of Merlot after we lost that Chardonnay to Pierce's disease. Let's tea-bud over half that acreage of Merlot to Cabernet Franc and Malbec. And so
Great.
Dedication was born, and that's our proprietary blend of 4 of the 5 Bordelais varietals commonly used in blends. A lot of people ask, why not Petit Verdot? Well, why do you add Petit Verdot? For more color or for more tannin? Well, we've got plenty of that.
You've got plenty of that. Yeah,
So
tannin.
why mess around with a fifth element that we don't really need? So we just stuck with Cab Merlot, Franc, and Malbec. over time, we realized with popularity, now we didn't have enough Merlot because we took it out for the dedication project. So about 3 or 4 years later, we tea-budded half of our Cabernet acreage, 2 acres to more Merlot and 1 acre for additional Cabernet Franc. And the fun thing about having those varietals too is that our wine club, and direct-to-consumer sales period, have really helped our business during the whole shelter in place, because we have all these loyal fans coming to us to buy more wine to support us. And one of the things that makes our club so loyal is that starting in 2009, I started bottling wines specific for wine club consumption. So our club is not so much of, okay, here's wine we have to sell, buy this wine. It's more of a curated experience, whereas the winemaker, I'm listening, I'm talking with our club members, what do you guys like, and we're introducing things. So many times these productions are only 200 cases. We have a blend called Family Cuvée that has a little bit of Petite Syrah in it. We have our Gate Block and our Monterre Cabernet Sauvignons, 2 single vineyard designate Cabernets. Those are 25 to 50 case productions.
And these are all club exclusives?
These are all club or tasting room. They go to the club first, and if there's any left, it's available from the tasting room. And then we started doing dessert wines all the way back in 1997. Not making the story too long, but that first vintage of Chardonnay in 94, about half of the barrels stuck halfway through fermentation. After several attempts to get those barrels to finish fermentation, it was clear the VA was just going up. We were never going to be able to make a good Chardonnay out of that portion of the barrels. After filing the paperwork to dispose of it, a neighbor who's a distiller asked if they could have it. So we gave it to them, and they paid us for that in half the volume of brandy they produced. So 1997, what do you do with 50 gallons of 140 proof brandy? So we made a port-style wine out of Cabernet that year. However, I failed to order enough glass for that first vintage, so we still had about 20 gallons, that 97 left over. We never vintage dated it, we just did port. No Roman numeral, anything.
Which is typical in many cases. As
you heard Dad telling the story of 98, the 98 vintage, we never had the sugar, so we didn't make one in 98, so we held on to it. We made some more in 99, and so we released port Roman numeral 2 as a blend of those two. And that time we intentionally did not bottle it. So I call it Solera style. It's more akin to a sourdough starter, if you will. So right now our current release is iteration 15. We just bottled 16, and I have 17 down in the barrel room ready to bottle.
Nice.
And the other thing that I started, the fun thing about this is I'm a kind of a long-term thinker, and you have to be in this business. In 2009, we made more port than the Solera could support. So had I put all of that vintage into it, it would have been massively dominated by one vintage. So rather than sell it in the bulk market or screw up our program, I just sat on it thinking, hey, maybe someday the Solera will be large enough that I can start to slowly work it in. But I had another idea in the back of my mind, and so by 2014, I was pretty much ready to announce to Dad, okay, here's this plan for this. And in 2015, I got to go to Portugal and got to taste many amazing wines. And I came back, tasted, and said, yes, this is well on path. So actually, this fall, we bottled it this winter. This fall, we're going to be releasing our first 10-year barrel-aged single vintage port. And we only bottled half of it. Wow. We're keeping the other half another 10 years.
Yeah. Well, and, pass it down generations and do 100-year eventually.
No.
Yeah, Portugal, they're up to like 300 years now.
Oh, they are. They are. Right. But usually by this point, it's mostly bottles, maybe the occasional barrel, but... Yeah. But no, along the way, so that was the 09. I have some of the 11, some of the 13, and then every vintage from 15 forward, I'm setting aside 2 barrels for an extended barrel aging program.
What a fun project.
I think we're fortunate enough that we have such a fan base that I can continue to create wines that they enjoy. And we just released this fall, we're going to be releasing our second vintage of Napuro, which is
I was going to ask you about that.
That is a Chardonnay-based white port style dessert wine. So in the middle of fermentation, in addition to having those beautiful mineral characteristics, that white peach, you have a honeysuckle and almost like just fresh honeycomb. Just take fresh honeycomb and pull it right up to your nose, and you've got those aromas coming out mid-fermentation. And by adding the brandy in right at that moment, you're freezing that moment in time. All of these wines, we're not adding any sugar. It's all the natural sugar of the vine. We're just capturing that moment in time with a little extra alcohol.
Wow. Yeah, I saw that that Napuro was something you were inspired by your trip to Portugal.
Exactly. And so it was one of those things that, what are we going to call it? That same year, we are grandfathered in and legally allowed to call these products port. However, it just didn't feel right to do it anymore, just because you have the right to.
Yeah.
And we'd have guests here in the tasting room who you'd come to the end of the tasting and say, well, the last wine we have for you is our port. Oh, no, thank you. I don't like port. The final wine we have for you is our iteration. Oh, what is iteration? Tell me more.
Great.
Well, and that really started because of the international trade agreement with Portugal. Very much like it's champagne. Champagne can only come from, it'd be manufactured, produced and bottled in Champagne factory. Right. Well, we don't call it, and we're gracious enough, we call it sparkling wine. But they've asked us, would you please cooperate with us and not call it port? Well, a half dozen of the wineries in Napa agreed, we'll call it something else. And there's a big learning curve to explain that to people. It's the same product, but we decided, hey, let's call it something different. We put out a fun challenge with our wine club. Hey, what would you call this? And most everyone really loves it because it's not, well, we started doing port because I don't like a lot of ports that are out there. They're either cough syrupy sweet or going down, they burn. Could we do something that was just in between that? So, and Andy's done a good job of putting all that together, and we'll call it iteration, and eventually we'll get everyone enthused about that, but it's only fair. Port should only come from Portugal. I mean, there's great port wines from there, and here we are doing, and eventually it'll catch on. I mean,
well, the fun thing too is that a lot of our customers, it surprises me that, well, first off, this didn't surprise me, but a lot of our customers come from the engineering world. One interesting surprise is that when my son started Georgia Tech almost 2 years ago, we started flying the Tech flag here. The number of Georgia Tech alumni and people from Georgia who come visit us here. And it's funny, ever since we started flying the Tech flag, I think Georgia went from being our 18th or 20th in terms of club memberships, I think is now our number 3 club membership state.
Wow, that's funny. Huh. And it's, you don't need to say what it is, port, or you could just having a name for it is fine. That's kind of interesting. It does create a conversation.
Yeah, and so I said the engineering background, so any math nerd hears the name iteration and it puts a smile on their face and they instantly understand where we're coming from in terms of, classically defined, the output of one formula becomes the input of the next, and that's how iteration works. We save some of the older, we blend it with the newer, and down the road it goes.
Yep, and Napuro is based on 2 words.
Napa and Douro. Douro River Valley.
Oh, all right.
That actually, one of our wine club members had that suggestion when we put it out for a contest, and so they won a fun 6-pack of...
That's a great
of our iteration along with Napuro, and they got bottle number 1 off the bottling line.
Yeah, that's wonderful that you tap into your club members to see what they have to say. And with my music radio background, to me, it's like you take requests.
Exactly.
Any future plans? Anything different coming down the pipeline?
Well, during this shelter in place thing, we're really pleased that everything has held up really well for us in terms even of sales. Andy's done some incredible webinars with friends who are musicians, and it's garnished a great following, and people were buying wine from that, and it's just been really making the best of it. And we got a great staff who were willing to come to work every day. We keep the social distancing going, and everybody's careful, when they do come, if you do call, we need to have a reservation, and wear masks. We require that. We even take your temperature when you come here.
Oh.
We want to be careful.
That's
we want to
thoughtful.
keep everyone that comes here safe and everyone who works here safe.
Right, wonderful.
Yes.
How about your Father's Day plans?
Well, I think he just invited me over for a Sunday afternoon.
It's about time, huh? What is it, just days away?
Yes.
Well, what's funny is my kids asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, well, funny you should mention that. I ordered a Wagyu brisket. It should arrive on Wednesday, so I was thinking of doing, starting a brisket on Saturday evening, and they said, now how exactly is that Father's Day? Like, well, hey, I have my own weird way of relaxing.
Yeah.
Andy's a great chef. There's undoubtedly. He's got a great palate when it comes to wine, great with food.
You guys have impressed me, and you're doing it right for what you have at your disposal here, and you've done a great job in getting the best out of this property that you can. And
Thank you.
Very
I
nice.
appreciate that.
keeps you young too, huh?
Yeah, no doubt. I get up in the morning, I look for, let's go. Friends say, well, wait a minute, you're 77. Why aren't you retired? Well, then what do I do?
Well, winemakers and growers don't retire.
I think you're absolutely correct. Hear that?
Yep.
Yeah, I'd say Fred seems to have at least another 5 or 10 years left in the vineyard. Andy has a long way to go. It was a pleasure to hang out with the Schweigers for a couple of hours. Visit schweigervineyards.com for their wine, history, and engaging virtual tastings. I really enjoyed their wine, especially the Iteration Port. I picked up a bottle, and it didn't last long. It was smooth and satisfying. Thanks to everyone who brought us together just prior to Father's Day. And thank you for listening again today. If you ever want to share your thoughts or ideas, send me an email to jeff@onthewineroad.com. You can find past interviews at onthewineroad.com. I'm on Instagram at jdwineroad, and there's more on facebook.com/onthewineroad. Please continue to practice safe protocols so we can all get back to doing what we do best, sooner than later. I'll reach out to you again soon on the Wine Road. I'm Jeff Davis.